host, John Light. I'm also the CEO and founder of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today I get to explore a little bit of an industry that everybody sees. It's kind of ubiquitous, but we don't think about all the time, and that's sitting in the auto dealership space. So today I have with me Esty McCoy from DealerWorks. Esty, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's have a little bit of fun, and we could start off, I guess. I'd love to get an introduction, but somehow in there, if you could work, and I know we talked about this pre-show, man, but where does ST come from? I mean, ESTY. Everybody's first instinct when I see it is, I want to write Etsy. And I know we're not here to talk arts and crafts, so we got to throw that out the window. But give us a little bit of background there, Esty, as we get this show rolling.
Well, I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania. We grew up with a farm until I was 20 years old. It was my grandparents' farm, and my dad is 14 of 16, and I was born 6 days after my grandfather passed away, and my grandfather's name was John Shredrick Thomas McCoy II, but everybody knew him as ST, the two middle initials, S period, T period. My name was actually supposed to be John S period, T period, McCoy. No actual middle name, just the two letters. But a nurse, she just wrote ESTY on the little place card on the bassinet, and my parents looked at it and said, "We'll leave it there." So, small town Pennsylvania, 5 Johns in my first grade class, and teacher said, "Nope, we're going to have nicknames. There's only going to be one John this year." I was not the one. So I became Esty, and it stuck. I can even remember graduating high school, walking across the stage, and a teacher walked up to me because over time, it was before the computers really ramped up, but all my school transcripts and things like that ended up with SDJ period McCoy. So everybody just assumed my first name was Esty. So.
Man, they stuck you in a box and kept you there, huh?
They did. So it's unique. It's a unique name. So I know when somebody says it, I know they're talking about me.
Well, that's for sure. And that has its pluses and minuses as well.
Yeah, it does.
Depending on what the conversation is. Esty, tell us for a quick moment before we jump into kind of our fulcrum question. What brought you, and what is DealerWorks? And maybe we'll just go ahead and lump all this together. And what do you and DealerWorks do in terms of what's the biggest problem you all solve in the dealership space, I should say?
Well, I jumped from farming to technology. I worked for Cisco Systems for about six and a half years, and then got into the payments. So I've spent 20 years in the payments world, and the two gentlemen that brought me in the industry were former NFL football players, and they taught me a lot about just themselves and how they operated and functioned. But the unique thing about athletes and car dealerships, 20 years ago, there was this just weird connection where every dealership wanted to have an athlete to be their spokesperson or come to their dealership. So we learned the card space really quickly, and what I realized in that space is there's a lot of disconnections, there's a lot of complexity. Dealerships are a very unique business. They're not your standard retail coffee shop or dental office or things like that. Dealerships have payments that are being captured from all over the different places in the dealership, whether it be parts, service, F&I, web, you name it. So that drew me into, that type of, and I just kind of took a liking to this dealership space. And DealerWorks was created by two gentlemen that they have other businesses, ironically, one in the dental space and one in the car parking garage space. So they have software but they had some customers that were dealerships, and they just felt that there wasn't a great solution out there. So they started building the product based upon what dealerships wanted. They brought me in as a consultant. I brought a lot of knowledge, from my 20 years of working with car dealerships. And it really attracted me because DealerWorks is a technology company. Payments isn't always the sexiest thing when it comes to dealerships, but it's a crucial part of that dealership. And the technology is what really drew me in. We have AI work, the big talk is AI, but we have AI working in the background, and we have technology that as we're talking to these dealerships, we're building the technology how they want it, not because, oh, this is just the way we built it and this is the way it works. The odd thing about dealerships, it doesn't matter where you go, dealerships all function and operate very differently. And it's strange to me. Some of them have different dealer management softwares they utilize, and that forces that change. But across the board, I have groups that are 50 rooftops across the country, and they'll have different controllers, and they all do things a little bit differently, and they've all had to kind of do the workarounds around the workarounds. And what we bring into the table is, no, you tell us how you want this and how it works for you. So that's what we've done.
Interesting, because I think we're entering into a time period where, it used to be when you got a software package or an application of some kind, unless it was an ERP, it is what it is, right? And in fact, even if you get an ERP nowadays, if you went out and got SAP or Oracle or NetSuite or Great Plains, JDF, whatever it might be, Dynamics, your least expensive implementation option is to always go with whatever they already have for best practices in your industry segment. That's kind of preset, and they'll have a partner who works with you to get it done and that sort of thing. But to look at payments, which is ubiquitous, you have to have them in any business nowadays. You have to have access to that stuff. There's always a cost associated with it, and how do you make it just tailored for not just dealerships, but say an entire dealership group that wants something done a certain way? I think we're finally hitting a point where it's cost effective to do some level of tailoring and development, adapt to what a client wants. Is that what you guys are seeing too? That from a cost perspective and effectiveness perspective, it makes sense to have something that's 80-90% of the way done, and you tweak it the rest of the way to get it aligned with what the customer wants?
Yeah, absolutely. Our core solution obviously, is built. That's all we focus on. That's literally all we do is dealerships. So our core functions and product is, it's designed to get rid of a lot of the pain points within that dealership. And there are all these little things, that happen. But there's always that final piece of what can we do to make it even better? How do we, reconciliation, it's huge for a dealership, and their monthly audits and their monthly close-ins. It's huge to be able to speed up that reconciliation for them and reduce that amount of time that they spend on that. So a lot of times we're spending, sometimes an hour or two understanding their processes. How do you do it? Maybe they're doing it because they didn't have any other choice, but what can we do to eliminate that process and that procedure? I mean, I have the 50 rooftop dealership, and it's very common in dealerships. They'll have an Excel spreadsheet or a little piece of paper sitting next to the cashiers, or maybe I call it active delivery. Maybe their service advisors are taking payments, which is huge. If I'm your service advisor and I'm taking that payment, you start and end with me. That just becomes a smooth transition for the customer. They don't have to deal with one person, but there are challenges with that for the accounting. So how can we make that? What do they envision? How do they see that reconciliation and that coming in? So that's what we do. We literally customize it. We have our pre-canned solutions and say, here what it is, but how would you like this tweaked?
Wow. I mean, customer service finds its way into software. Who would have thought? Because that's really what it is, right? Is we're going to be attuned into and deliver on what our customer wants, which ultimately is how they want to run their business. I mean, when you sit back and think about it, any application, be it the dealer management software application or the stuff that you guys do there at DealerWorks, it's really about how they want to run their business. And everyone, like you said, is a little bit different. Speaking of which, I got to ask, we talk about auto dealerships, but there's so much else out there. And I mean, there's a big commercial truck dealerships too, Mack and Peterbilt and whatnot. And they're not necessarily housed where you'd find kind of, let's just say, your normal, can I say residential customer, normal person customer, the person who has a job or they have a business. You were talking large commercial fleets, but do you guys also get off into that space where you're dealing with heavy equipment and the dealerships that deal with tractors and dump trucks and backhoes and all that kind of stuff?
We do, we do. They operate they operate very similar to the auto dealership space. What makes them a little bit different is they're dealing with much larger transactions. So these can create friction points, especially when you're setting up a new location. They have very large average tickets. We can literally take about 8 to 10 data points from a customer, have that customer live in about 30 minutes with a high average ticket of 150,000 or more. So that doesn't sound like much, but those are big pain points because some of these large trucks, and a lot of these, they're trucks driving across the country, and maybe it's a driver and the vehicle has to get fixed. How do we make it easy for their corporate office that's located 2,000 miles away? How do we make this easy? How do we protect that dealership and make sure it's a cost-effective and a secure solution for them to receive that payment? These are things we've brought in technology that protects the dealership, but also makes it frictionless for the corporate office to make that payment.
Frictionless scares me a little bit, but maybe I'm old school about it. When I think frictionless, once you make a decision and pull the trigger, it just slides right through. There's no having to count money out. There's no trying to figure out this or that. It just goes. And I guess that's the way we're going as society, right? And how business works is it's just this very slick system. So it brings me to another question. When you're prepping this solution, your core business, and you want to take it out to a dealership, what do you do about their existing systems? I've always wondered this, because right now they're all getting paid somehow, right? So how do you step in there and differentiate yourself and make it cost effective in terms of solving whatever that problem might be? Like maybe there's more friction points now. I know the dealerships where I've been taking my truck, you go in and you talk to the service manager, or they take it back, somebody pages you or texts you, and you go to the cashier, you pay, you get your key, you go out, pick your truck up and go. And it feels fairly easy to me, but to your point, man, how easy would it be if you're sitting there and the guy can just take your credit card or your debit card right there? Figure out the exact work that needs to be done, sign off and go. I mean, how do you go into a dealership and identify that they have the pain points necessary that would drive them to the solution that you bring to the table with DealerWorks?
Well, I think that most of the dealerships out there, they're utilizing technology that solutions that were created a long, long time ago. Standalone terminals, things of that. It may be easy for the service advisor or who are, the cashier, however they're taking the payment. It may be easy for them, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't take the payments to where the customer is. Dealerships nowadays, whether they've made that decision or they've thought about it, but pretty much every dealership across the country is talking about surcharging, because their costs, the pandemic was pretty brutal on the car industry in the beginning. They had some good times there. There were shortage of vehicles, so they were able to make profit on those. But the challenge is now we're on the other side of that, and they've had to increase their pay to the individuals, so their costs have risen, and now the price of the cars, has gone down again. So they're in this spot of, we're losing margin on the bottom line, and dealerships, have a lot of expenses going out the door every single month with SaaS fees and different things. So they're all talking about surcharging, passing this fee on to the customer, and it's a great avenue for a dealership to add money to the bottom line. The challenge is there's going to be friction at their customers. Right. So how do you make it easier? Customers aren't carrying checks around. Debit cards have a limit of how much you can put on them in a day. So we have solutions that makes it easy, protects the dealership, makes it easy for the customer. I say it all the time. One of our big dealer groups, he's director of operations, and we're coming out with this quick service kiosk where the customer come in, drop their key off, put the keys in a secure vault system, pick up the car, sign it, digital screens, the whole 9 yards. And he was like, well, I'm worried about losing that touch that my service advisor has. And I said, but you have to, I said, you've been in the car space for 30 years. I says, where cars and customers are today and payments is so different. These younger generation, they don't want to have this. They don't want to deal with people. They want to be able to no touch, using AI, to answer the question whether they need that solution or that part or that item. They want to be able to pay. They want to be able to come in. I said, you have to meet your customers where they are. You're going to have those customers that want to come in, deal with their service advisor from the time they drop their key off to the time they pick it up and pay. You're going to have those customers too. So we give you solutions that are different than what you have today. But on the backside, I always have this affinity towards the accounting department because, a lot of times the GMs or the owners and the principals of these dealerships, they'll make these decisions of, hey, I want to do this because I want to save money, but they don't realize the complexity and the issues that they create for the accounting or the service director or whoever. They create these other issues. Yes, it does save the money, but what is it doing to the rest of the team? So we've thought those things through, and we provide these different ways for a customer to pay, whether they want to have that that hands-on experience, or they just want to come in and drop their car, pick it up, leave, pay. How is the dealership protected at that point? So we have those solutions. So that, I think our hands-on approach is very different. We're not just shipping equipment and products to the dealership. We'll spend, plenty of time with the dealership before we ever go to implement. We'll spend some time with them learning about their pain points, their processes, procedures, and then we show up on site and we do more one-on-one training, because sometimes the messaging, it's important if the dealership is gone to surcharging, it's important that the service advisor understands why the dealership's doing that and giving them the terms and the rebuttals and the things, because customers are going to complain. They don't want to pay that. They want to get their rewards and they don't want to pay that surcharge. So those are different things that we can do that just differentiates us from a lot of our competitors out in the space.
Yeah, no, I think it's smart. And so let me ask you this. Esty, if somebody wanted to learn more, man, what's the best way for folks to find you and DealerWorks and get in touch?
You can look me up on LinkedIn, Esty McCoy, or DealerWorks.io. You can reach out through me there. You can schedule a time with me. I'm more than happy to, spend some time and go into more details. Our solution. I say this all the time when I talk to dealerships. I said, look, we can go down a million rabbit holes. Our solution, but just throw the questions at me and I'll probably be able to say, yep, here's how we solve that, or yep, we have that. I always say that there's something for everybody with our solution. It's not just built for your customers. It's not just built for service. It's not just built for accounting. There's something for everybody.
Awesome. Esty, thanks so much. Look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thanks, John.